Hi everyone, welcome to my Assessment 1 presentation. Let's get into it. Look whose work this is. I promise it's not just for brown nosing purposes. I also just really like this work. So this is Rachel's work, One a Week, inspired by Martino Gamper's 100 Chairs in 100 Days. I found these projects really interesting and inspiring as I enjoy artistic projects that cross the line between science and art. For me, these objects represent a repeatable experiment within specific parameters similar to the scientific method. This repetition can yield really interesting results as you are forced to think outside the box, within the box you've set for yourself. I'll be pulling ideas about repetition in the design process, using conventional recycled materials and chair design from these works. So, Matt Harkness is a PhD candidate at UNSW who looks at innovative ways of recycling plastic. His research has a focus on 3D printer waste in combination with furniture design. I find his work interesting as I'm also interested in furniture design and creative reuse of materials. I'm interested to try and make a stool or chair entirely from recycled plastic, as I'm using polyethylene, HDPE or LDPE, as opposed to PLA, which is polylactic acid, which is what he uses. I might be able to get a stronger object than Matt was able to with his experiments. His stool, as you can see, has unrecycled legs, but I could potentially make something wholly out of high-density polyethylene. I also really like the beanbag filled with makerspace waste, as I just think that this is a really creative reuse of materials. When I think about recycling plastic, I always go straight to melting it down, but this doesn't have to be the case. In my experimentation with polyethylene, I will also try and make some things without melting the plastic down. Finally, something to consider is his work with clay. In these objects, he uses a mixture of PLA and clay in the Potterbot. These pieces are then fired and the plastic burns away to create a porous effect. This is an interesting combination of the two materials that I'm inquiring into, plastic and clay. However, I am not enthusiastic about trying this kind of experiment. Burning plastic, even in a kiln, will produce toxic fumes. Not to mention, a very similar porous effect can be achieved by mixing sawdust and clay. Composite materials, although providing endless opportunity for experimentation, are not always an ethical or sensible thing to make or make with, and these ethical considerations inform my practice as a designer. So, I was also looking at recycled repair and in combination with Memphis design. Here are my sketches of a range of furniture fixed with plastic. The colour of reclaimed plastic could be difficult to control, and if mixed can create a marbled or scattered effect. These bright colours reminded me of the eclectic Memphis style, which uses strong geometric shapes to create unconventional or unexpected furniture designs. And you can see here there's a teapot that I've included as well from the Memphis era. So going on with teapots, Johnny Vegas is an English comedian and also he is a trained potter. His work, Teapot, is in the Victoria and Albert Museum collection. This teapot is particularly interesting due to the way it's made. Vegas makes the entire object in 1 minute, 60 seconds. As stated by the V&A, the teapot is often regarded as the most challenging of ceramic forms. Made up of several functional parts, body, spout, handle, lid, and internal strainer, the teapot can be complicated to perfect if it is to be practical as well as aesthetic. Vegas rejects the expectations of perfection, function, and aesthetic with his work, and replaces them with a different pressure, time. The result is an object that rebels against centuries of ceramic rules and practices. A ceramic object usually takes about a month to complete, but Vegas subverts this expectation in his work. I feel like this example is interesting for this assessment, as changing something somewhat abstract like time can alter the object physically. So, as you can see from my research, I'm looking into a mixture of furniture and object design with a focus on chairs and teapots. Moving on to my material tests. So this turned out to be one of my most successful experiments, and unfortunately one of the most difficult to replicate. I cut up a mix of semi-transparent white and yellow plastic with scissors into small pieces, and then I melted this mixture onto a flat sheet. This was then rolled into a tube. Due to the different transparencies of the plastic, the piece looks awesome if you hold it up to a light. It is also incredibly strong and hard, similar to a wooden rolling pin, only harder and lighter. So for the design outcome, I decided to pursue this transparency glow that came from this particular experiment. I decided to draw up this design idea of a thick HDPE lamp using this material. It also poses a question I often considered throughout this project. If I'm using recycled plastic, do I want to use as much as possible, as in this super thick and strong lamp, or as little as possible, which you can see in my other design outcomes that I'll explain soon. On one hand, there's so much plastic to recycle in the world, so it makes sense to put as much of it as possible into a piece of furniture that will last a long time. On the other hand, it's a resource like any other, so should we try and be conservative with it, even if that means it might stay or go to landfill? I'm not sure what the answer is, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Influenced by the playful geometry of Memphis, I mocked up this CAD of a chair. I'd like to try and use the same hard HDPE as in the previous design outcome, but this time in combination with traditional woodworking techniques. Potentially each element of the chair would be a different colour to also reference Memphis. So this is along similar lines, except it's more of a square design than a rounded one. I thought it'd be interesting to make a step stool, as they are often made out of plastic these days. Again, looking to use traditional joinery, meaning no glue. allowing the plastic to be easily recycled again at the end of life of this object. So when I was working with the plastic, I wanted to get it into smaller pieces as they are easier to melt, or they melt more quickly. So I tried a few different methods, one of which was using my paper shredder, which didn't shred the plastic like I thought it would, but instead created this stripy texture. This was an interesting accidental discovery which led to me developing several design outcomes. Here I used the shredded plastic milk bottle and then folded it into itself to create this corrugated effect. This texture refracts light nicely and has a classic lamp feel to it. I think my grandma actually has a lamp that looks exactly like this, except it's made out of starched fabric. The reason I like this design is that I believe I could get it to a point where the end product does not look like the source material. It might not even look like it used recycled materials at all. Currently though, it does look incredibly janky because of the use of hot glue. The other benefit of this technique is the minimal processing and material it uses, so it has a very low environmental cost in comparison to the other design. So yeah, I'm still having this crisis of should I be using heaps of plastic or as little plastic as possible? Anyway, last in my plastic design outcomes is this pendant lamp. When I put the milk bottles through the shredder, they actually retained their curved shape at the top, which fit nicely into each other to create this petal-shaped lampshade. I could cut pieces more precisely and create a larger version or make them look like actual petals. The milk bottle still has great light refracting qualities, creating a soft glow from this harsh LED lamp. Moving on to clay. I got super carried away with this as I tried all types of different clays and a bunch of different CAD models, but by far the most successful was this print that I affectionately named the Scribble. This in itself became one of my design outcomes, even though it started as just a test. I like this object so much that I think with a bit of tweaking, it could be its own object. The idea stems from translating the handmade to the manufactured and the organic to the computerized, which is reflected in the hand-drawn scribble, which the CAD software then had to translate, and then the organic clay kind of being tamed by the 3D printer. So next up are these teapot prints. With reference to Johnny Vegas's imperfect teapot, I'd like to print some of these objects and see how the printer handles them, with and without support material. The idea is to subvert the teapot in a similar way to Johnny Vegas, not focusing on functionality or aesthetic, but just the process. Idea number 8 is to create a series of teapots, all with different elements printed. For example, one with a printed body, one with a printed spout, etc., and then make the other elements by hand. Using the repetition similar to Rachel and Martino Gampier, you can create a massive exhibition of different but similar design objects. This was another test that I did with the 3D printers. The first one I did with my home printer and then the other one at UNSW. But as you can see, I didn't get very far with this model. This is the CAD on the left that I used, and then I believe if I change it slightly to be on the one on the right, it might be able to get this design to work better. So I really like to tinker with this more because I think the drooping of the different elements, I think would be a really interesting print if I could get it to work. Finally, I want to talk about the elephant in the room, my homemade clay. It's a bit of a sad story, but I basically spent a long time trying to make it work in the printers and having all sorts of different failures and never was able to get it to work in this time. But if I was to get it to work, trypophobics beware, this is what I would print. This, printed on vase mode in a clay 3D printer, would look phenomenal. So all the blue would be gone, you'd just be left with some columns inside of a hexagon, and then with different levels of infill, the print would look completely different. So if you did, 5%, 10%, 50% infill, you'd have either much more dense or much more sparse polygons connecting the tubes to the outside edge. I really wanted to design something that would give back to the land that I took the clay from. So this native bee nest was the answer. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.